I turn to the right and I turn to the left. I hear a clicking noise. That's a classic sign of a bad drive axle. I know what you're thinking, it's a pickup truck. Well, it's a four-wheel drive. It has drive axles just like a front-wheel drive does. Today on Tech Garage, we'll tackle this drive axle debacle. Welcome to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Well, I'm driving around in our GMC Sierra, turn to the right or left, and I got a faint click. But when I lock it in four-wheel drive and turn, it gets a lot more distinctive. That's a classic sign of a bad drive axle. Brian, we got two options at this point. We can turn the radio up a little louder, or we can diagnose and fix this one. I think we should choose the latter of the two.
Probably should. You know, I like good music as much as the next guy, but I think this probably warrants a repair. So I'll tell you what the big clue was when you said the clicking sound, and you've all heard it. You want to know where to start. That immediately took me to the CV axles. Now, I inspected the driver's side, but over here on the passenger side, John, check this out. I looked at the top boot, no leaking, no lubricant, anything, no cracks right there. And on the back side of this lower boot, it looks good, but when I come around here, you can see right here, there's a split in the boot. And it's just starting to weep some fluid right there. And so there's dirt inbound. That's a replacement, right?
Regardless if it's clicking or not, when that boot's torn, you're gonna have to replace that. And you know what, Brian? I got a demo set up over here so we can see inside a drive axle and why it's clicking. Why don't you tell them how you're gonna do it, and I'll get over here.
Awesome. This is a big job. Bring your heavy-duty friends, a breaker bar, a sledge, you're gonna need that. Tell you what, we gotta separate the upper ball joint up here. We've got to drop the tie rod out right here, and ultimately we'll pull this cap off and get to this end axle nut. That's where you're going to need some breaker bar help and support. So heavy duty lifting over here. I'm going to get this started, but I'll tell you what we're going to do differently today. We're going to lower this truck down and do this job at jack stand height like you're going to be doing in your driveway. So let me get this thing down, get it underway, and John's going to show you how it all works.
Of course, Brian. What is a CV axle and why is it clicking? Here's the drive axle we're actually putting on the pickup truck. And this end here is going to the front differential. This is a plunge joint. It moves in and out and changes lengths effectively to compensate for suspension movement. The other one's a fixed joint. This one's going out there to a spindle. That moves back and forth. The cool part is this cutaway right here. You can see the plunge joint. And these are called a tripod tool-up right here. And there's 3 rollers on here. And that moves with suspension because it's going to go up and down. If you have a drive shaft, the yoke will do it on that end. Now over here is the cool part. This is what you can see. These are the ball bearings in here. When we're turning to the left or right, they're clicking. Why? Because they're just becoming loose, worn, or the slit in that boot's actually going to cause grease to go out, dirt to get in there and contaminate, and it's going to click as it turns. So we're going to have to replace that over on our pickup truck. Let's see how he's coming along.
All right, I'm going to start by separating the tie rod end here. There's the nut. A little upward tension here in my arm. I'm going to see if I can knock this loose by pulling up. And there we go. All right, that's out. Now, we're going to move up here to the upper ball joint. I've also got this loose. A couple spins with the nut. Okay, got this nut just about ready to come off. Now, make sure you're clear. Your kneecaps are clear from this when it separates. You want a good pry bar to get up in here and get some leverage. So we're going to create some upward pressure in this control arm. Get up in here, no brake hose, not hitting anything. Want to pry up, lift up, a couple smacks square. There we go. So we got that out. Now we've got some flexibility here. Get this up out of the way. We're going to work on this axle nut. Now this too, heavy lifting. Good heavy duty socket. Get your breaker bar, maybe a buddy, and then good trick, drop a screwdriver right down through the rotor. Let's see if we get a little bit of torque here. There we go, there's one. All right, keep working this off. And then we're ready to pull that CV axle out. Okay, now up to the mounting flange here at the top of the CV axle. So get myself some access, 15mm socket, and a gun, and get this going. All right, come in and start with the bottom here first. Good. First one out. Move up. There's 5 bolts here total. Take your time, work them out. So we'll get all these out. We'll retract this axle. We're going to put the new one in, essentially reverse the procedure. Torque specs mean a lot here, so take your time, do it right. Stay with us. More to come on Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts.
Time for a Tech Garage pop quiz. Which axle shaft joint can change lengths during operation? A. Fixed joint, B. Plunge joint, C. Outboard joint, or D. Ball and socket joint? The correct answer is B. When the suspension system deflects, the length of the axle must change, and the plunge joint allows this change in length. Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Performance Parts, over 1,000 parts that perform. Dustless Blasting, it's the future of surface preparation. Custom Auto Sound, the originator of classic car OEM fit radios since 1977. And by Advance Auto Parts, let's get you back on the road.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now the axle job, that was pretty straightforward, but that axle nut you saw, it's pretty extreme torque. Well, I got a little helper here. He can use this ratchet, make it easier for him. Nah, I think we'll watch him sweat as he starts to reassemble it.
Well, I did loosen one more bracket here for the brake hose and the ABS sensor, just to give us a little more travel. We've got the new axle. We came in up over the sway bar, over the link, don't want to damage that boot. Rolled it down in, she's sitting in place ready to go. Now we're going to work on this marriage of the splines, and a little tilt up, get the right angle, and work it. There we go. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get the axle nut on. New washer, new nut, we're going to hold that in place. Then we're going to have to swing this whole assembly up, get this upper ball joint back in place so that we can get the mounting bolts back at the back done. Sit up on top of the shock mount, roll the assembly back up. I like to hold it with my knee here in place. Drop this in. Now, you need either a second set of hands here or a good pry bar to help your cause. I'm going to come in from the top, get this rolled in. I'm going to get a nut on it right here. Hold this back together. Now, mounting bolts back at the flange, back into the differential. That's the next step. Torque matters. Follow your torque specs all the way around. But do you want to see how a CV axle and joint works in action? John's got that.
Drive axle in action. I'm going to push the button here. You see it actually running. Inside here is that plunge joint we talked about earlier. On this model, it's actually splined right into the transaxle. Later, we'll see our RSX works the same way. Then it transmits the energy outside here to this outside joint. This is the fixed joint right here. You can see it spinning. Now that fixed joint has to go through the whole turn ratio. You can see it as I move it to the left and to the right. Now think about that. That thing has to turn, and the plunge joint has to plunge up and down to compensate for suspension movement. Well, there's a driveline in action. Brian's moving a little faster than this drive axle. Let's check in with him.
Okay, we're down to the final 2 bolts on the inner flange. There's 5. Now, impact gun, we're going to run them down. I'm going to come back, tighten them again manually. But to make this easy, just roll it around. You have good access. Here's number 5. Run it down, and we'll come back and finish those off in just a minute. Now, the next step is ball joint reassembly, tie rod in. Your friend, the pry bar, get up here, a little down pressure. We're going to go ahead and run this nut, which I've got started. There we go. A little down pressure. This too will get torqued. We can certainly get it snug and everything in place. Okay, work that down good and snug. Same thing down at the tie rod. A little bit of down pressure. Switch sockets on our impact gun. Make this easier. We're a big fan of mechanical advantage. Down pressure. Okay, we're all set. Now, the final step is this axle nut. Now, we checked with Moto Logic. This calls for 177 foot-pounds of torque in 2 stages, 58 pounds first, and then button it up at 177. That's heavy lifting. So we're going to run this down with the impact gun and get it close. Now I'm going to actually switch over to the torque wrench. So this is a pretty simple and straightforward system. You know, something to consider, this is an oblong nut. That's what holds your axle in place. If yours doesn't have that, check the spec and make sure if you need to spike that nut and create an inset there, that's what's going to hold it on. But check yours, it may be different. Pretty simple, straightforward system, but it's a lot different on a front-wheel drive transaxle. John's going to show you how that works on the RSX when we come back. So stay with us on Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts.
Time for a Tech Garage pop quiz. What must you do before checking ball joint wear? A. Apply a load to the load-carrying ball joint. B. Unload the load-carrying ball joint. C. Measure the ball joint in any position. Or D. Measure ball joint wear with full vehicle weight applied. The correct answer is B. When checking ball joints, the load-carrying joint must be unloaded before testing.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. I pulled in Project RSX Resurrection, and I went ahead and did the drive axle. The only thing different from the Sierra is I had to pull it out of the actual transaxle itself, add some fluid, make sure everything was all right, but it was the same thing. But lo and behold, as I was doing it, you can see the ball joint right here. Man, this thing was all deteriorated, dirt getting in there, flopping around. Have to change it while we're there. Just took a big old hammer and knocked it right out of there. It's press fit, not as easy to put back in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this new ball joint here, and we're going to go ahead and install it into here.
Wow, I thought it was just a drive axle job.
Well, it was a drive axle. While you're having fun, look what I found, man. It's a mess.
Holy cow.
Go ahead and replace it. I'm glad you're here because I can actually use your help.
Absolutely.
I'm going to get this thing up there and get it started, and then what we need to do is take that press tool.
Yep.
You can knock them out with a hammer, but you're sure not going to put it back in.
Yeah.
Especially on this application because it's located in the spindle. So if you get that started up there,
Yep.
I'll back this off of here.
Another classic place where the right tool for the job matters.
Yeah, and an extra hand
Get this fairly true right here. I'm good down
How
here.
you feel, straight?
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Feel pretty good.
Looking pretty good. All right, now we can put a big breaker bar on it. I'm going to try to just go ahead and pull it in. You might got some glasses there.
Yep,
Watch your eyes.
you
We're gonna
got
use
it.
a
Go
lot
ahead.
of pressure on here. You ready?
Yep.
Man, look at that. Boy, the right
Sweet.
tool makes all the difference in the world,
Sure
doesn't
does.
it?
Yep.
Now you can see we pulled it right up in there. Brian, you can take this joker over to the car.
Sure
but you know
can.
what?
You know what?
Before you go, don't forget, then the kit gives you everything you need. The retaining clip, the nut, along with the Zerk fitting. Make sure you throw those in.
That's
too.
actually a big upgrade. The other original didn't have a Zerk fitting on it.
I
so.
sure didn't, no. So that thing will be like new. It'll handle better
Guess
along
he's
with our
putting me
CV
back to
axle.
work.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Now there's a couple of options. When you're doing those ball joints, they may be screwed in. This one here is actually riveted in, so you'd have to cut the rivets off and then go ahead and knock it out. But you saw how much work that was. I mean, it's a lot of work. Why not just buy a loaded one? Moog says the whole ball joint loaded with the control arm. You get the bushings and everything, get alignment, everything's going to be in good shape. Let's see how Brian's coming along with that spindle.
Okay, we've got the lower ball joint nut on, but not tight yet. We've got the top strut mounting bolt in, again, loose, so we can work in the second mounting bolt. Don't forget, we're going to run these down pretty tight, but we've got to get in alignment after this project since we've had it all apart. We also have the axle nut on and torque down. Pry bar's your friend there. You can hold it still and get the right torque on this nut. Hey, remember the nut we showed earlier? It said it was oblong? This is not. There's the indentation you may have to make to hold that nut in place. Just check your application. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run these down. One. Okay, good. Now, we're going to get this brake line bracket reinstalled. I'm going to hang the rotor, get the caliper back in place. I'll tell you what, this lower ball joint was pretty easy to diagnose for John. It fell apart in his hands. But on your vehicle, if you want to check it, if you've got high mileage, there's a right and a wrong way to check it, depending on what type of suspension you have. John's going to explain that.
When talking ball joints, it's all about understanding a load carrying and a following ball joint. That's determined by spring location. On this front end here, you can see the spring's located right here. That's putting the pressure down here. This is the load carrying ball joint. This is the follower. To check this one, I want to take a jack stand and I want to come up under the control arm to take the tension off the spring. Once I do that, I can get a big pry bar, put it up under the tire, pick up and down on it, and check for any perceivable movement. Now, some cars have the spring location right here on top. Well, that changes the whole ball game, because what happens, this one becomes the load carrying, this one down here is on the follower. So what you want to do then is you want to take your jack stand and you want to put it over on the frame of the vehicle and lift up. That will relieve the tension. Take your pry bar once again, check it, look for any movement. If you have any movement, you can go ahead and replace them just like we did. And Brian's about done with his. Let's check in with him.
Okay, top mounting bolt on the caliper mounting bracket. Let me get the lower one here. Kind of got to feel your way in. Tell you what, we're close on this project. Now, we've covered a lot about drive axles today, and we've shown you a couple different options. Now, it's important when you're tacking everything back together, one of the most important steps along the way, in this ball joint with a castellated nut, make sure you get the cotter key in. You don't want anything to have any chance to separate. We didn't re-torque the strut mounting bolts because, frankly, as soon as this wheel goes back on, we're headed right down the road for a new alignment. And everything else is buttoned up, and our RSX is one step closer to its first autocross. Now, of everything we've shown you today, it's all fairly low horsepower, fairly pedestrian application. You want to see how the big boys do it, John's headed down to Burnyzz Speed Shop. That's where they got some serious drive axles. Stay with us when we come back on Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts.
Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Cardone, the new and remanufactured auto parts leader. Steel Rubber Products, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. Clamp Tight, the clamp making tool. And by Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back on the road.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. This performance playbook's all about the driveline, and on an 8-fuel dragster, that's an important piece of the puzzle. When Josh Hart gets on it on that starting line, this tire is going to come up and it's going to ride on a little contact patch. Now, Josh Hart, man, take us through that driver's seat, that experience when you take off. What are you feeling, these tires, and actually what goes on?
It's an unbelievable G-force that just sets you back in the seat the entire pass.
And what happens? I mean, do you feel the tires? Do you feel any vibrations?
In the first 60 feet, you have to be able to really feel it in the seat of your pants and tell the difference between drive shaft chatter and tire shake.
So you can tell it's a good run when you know you have one?
Typically, yes, in the first 60 feet, you can actually feel the car get up on the tire properly.
And when it gets up on the tire, you're riding on a little contact patch, aren't you?
Yes, sir. This is what it basically looks like when you're at full acceleration. It's about 11 inches that actually ends up touching the pavement.
Well, we looked at some drive axles today, but you know, Drew's back in the shop here. He's putting some half shafts on a Corvette on the rear axle.
This is our 78 Corvette. Came in with a few leaks, a few squeaks, pretty much came through and assessed it, pulled everything out, cleaned all the surfaces, replaced the universals and the U-joints in it, cleaned up the half shafts, replaced the internal seals. Upon disassembly, we found out that the seal was bad. We fixed the seal, replaced anything that we had, like the universals. You can hear the whine out of the universals, you can hear the clunking out of it. Pulling these out is a very big job. You got to pull the rear arms, pull the whole thing out as an assembly, put it on the bench, break it all down, knock the universals all out, take the seals out. All this inside of here all has its own seals and washers, and it's all been refurbished too. Put the assembly back in, the biggest thing is shimming and aligning your rear arms. Those are a big problem and very time consuming getting those right. You pretty much just snug down your straps to torque specs and just go through and make sure everything's clearanced and free and you got no binding. You know, once you're all done, you get a tighter feel in the suspension. You don't have no more noises, more of the slop. You got the side drain right here. We pretty much just drain, put that in there. We can suck them out. We pulled this one, pulled it on the wrench, just split it, just let it all come out. Refilling it, just pull the plug out, fill it up to here till it starts coming out, put the plug back in it, clean it up and ready to go.
That's an inside look at high performance in action at Burnyzz. Now let's head back to Tech Garage.
Bo from Chicago emailed this week with a 2014 Charger SRT8. Really nice car. There's a lot of popping sounds coming from underneath the vehicle, especially on bumpy roads, of which there are plenty in Chicago. Car only has 62,000 miles on it, so he's replaced the struts, but it didn't make a difference. It's still popping.
Well, keyword there, SRT8, aggressive driving, Chicago, pothole capital of the world.
Yes.
Don't go together. Bo, hey, it's just a suspension-related component. I mean, we run a lot of those tests. Check your struts, your shocks. They'll rattle internally for leakage. Your spring, your insulator's there. And we showed you today about the ball joints. Very common popping noise right there. Man, there's bushings. There's a lot of suspension components to check.
There really are. And these bushings absolutely take a beating, and they do wear out. There's a lot of really good aftermarket options. Energy suspension components, for example, really good stuff. Holds up in the most severe duty conditions like you're driving in. So you got some options there. Pretty easy checks you can do.
Yeah, we did these checks today on the show with the ball joint. Just follow your load and following ball joint. When you do it, make sure you know which one it is, or a drive park test. Turn to the right or to the left. Get a friend under there. Be safe. You'll see some buckling, man. Suspension's made to wear out. It's going to wear out.
It really is, but it can be heavy lifting and be a big job. You saw us suffer through that today. We had the right tools, though, and that makes a difference. If you don't want to tackle something that big, go to one of the professional shops. They've got the right tools, and they can take care of you and get you back on the road.
Well, check out more of Tech Garage on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Like always, thanks for watching. We're sure grateful, and we'll get you back on the road.
Production assistance for Tech Garage is provided by Chipola College, located in Marianna, Florida. Founded in 1947, Chipola was recently ranked as one of the top 3 community colleges in the United States.